Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to jump into our second segment on today's show, talking about Micah Parsons. And no, we're not talking about the Dallas Cowboys this time, oddly enough, but more so about Bleacher Report, another streaming media company off of the last segment that we talked about with Netflix and the NFL. Now we're shifting our attention over to Bleacher Report, announcing yesterday that Micah Parsons and themselves reached a multi-year extension, and on top of that, they named Micah Parsons as the president of the Bleacher Report Gridiron. This officially makes Micah Parsons the first active professional athlete to hold a leadership title at a sports media company. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, you see other active players in the media world already, from Draymond Green with the NBA. You have Mookie Betts as well, Trae Young also as well, having all of them having their own podcast. It seems like everybody has their own podcast. Even in the NFL as well, Max Crosby has a show, another podcast as well. So you might be a little bit confused as to why, this is any different, why this is historical. Well, reacting to those players having their podcast and now Micah Parsons agreeing to this extension, his new title comes with a bit more responsibility. He does have that title of president of the Bleacher Report Gridiron. So with that, his own podcast that he has on Bleacher Report, called The Edge, he'll also continue to work on that as well, starting back up in August. But he'll also work with Bleacher Report Gridiron with their team to come up with new, in their words, with new content and design merchandise for the 2.5 million followers that they have, according to the sources around the situation and how the whole detail has worked itself, or how the whole deal has worked itself out. With that, it isn't something that's too foreign, I guess, for athletes now to dive more into the media world. I mentioned before on Bleacher Report specifically, Mookie Betts has a podcast around baseball and just his experience reacting to things around the league. You also have Trae Young as well, having also another popular podcast where he talks to basketball players and just everything basketball really as well. So you have baseball, football, and basketball on Bleacher Report already. But Micah Parsons, his show has drawn the most attention, it seems like. He was also a co-host on the Bleacher Report Gridiron Draft Night Special alongside with CJ Stroud, and with that there was a 27% increase in the viewership as well with that whole Draft Night Special. That was the highest boost percentage of any live stream on the Bleacher Report app. So it seems like Micah Parsons has drawn the biggest crowd so far with not only his podcast but just appearing on these Draft Night specials and really just appearing a lot in the media, quite frankly, on things that he says on his podcast. It's all not controversial, but it just draws a lot of people in with things that he has to say and just how he reacts to things like that. He is very popular in the media world, and he's also still obviously a football player. It is unknown right now if Micah Parsons has any ownership stake in this new extension that he has. I'm going to assume that he doesn't, because I feel like if he did, that would be something mentioned in all these various articles that you see out on the topic. So I'm just going to assume that he does not have any ownership stake in this new deal. But other than that, I could be wrong, with further details coming later on. But from what I saw right now at the time of doing this show, I didn't see that he did have any ownership stake. And also, on this topic of Micah Parsons getting extensions, a little bit of a side note, but he also signed a multi-year extension with Adidas. So Micah Parsons, is safe to say, he is winning off of the football field. He is winning in the offseason, and it is odd to say because he is, like I mentioned before, a football player before anything else. He is only still 24 years old, and he is already a pretty prominent figure in the media world, much more than maybe the traditional Cowboys fan would like to see Micah Parsons comment on every single topic, it seems, in just media, doing other people's jobs while he's still playing football. That might rub people the wrong way, as I've seen on various shows on ESPN or any other show, morning shows that you see, some people just don't like the fact that Micah Parsons is so active, has his own podcast, and talking so freely about things that go on in the NFL and really just about other players and other situations across the league as well. I don't see a problem with it before when he just had the podcast and he was saying whatever he wanted to. I didn't have a problem with that, but now I am starting to skew a little bit to the more precarious side because he does have that leadership title. There does come a lot more responsibility, and how it all ties back into football, what he does in his free time, he might have endless free time to still focus on football and do everything like this. Not to my knowledge, he doesn't have kids or anything like that other to focus on off the field on top of this new deal, so he could just have a bunch of free time. But on top of having the leadership deal, having all of this just attention on the Cowboys, and really going back to what Jerry Jones said, being all in on this season, could this be seen as a distraction? There does come a point where I am totally on the side of how Micah Parsons put it when he reacted to this extension. Really, the biggest point he made was to get athletes more prepared for their post-playing career. That's why he agreed to this extension with Bleacher Report. He already had the podcast, but assuring that long-term contract, that long-term assurance is something that he found very important, and that is also something else you see athletes talk about. If you don't have a plan for after playing, it could get pretty depressing, I guess is the word for lack of a better term, for these athletes that just don't find the motivation, the routine that they usually have when they are playing. Now they're retired or they're forced to stop playing, and they really don't know where to look, don't know what to do with all this free time now. That was the biggest point Michael Parsons was trying to make, trying to validate this extension and trying to get this leadership position with Bleacher Report to have that assurance after he is done playing football. But the questions now come up about, is it too early? I mentioned he is only 24 years old. Especially playing with the Cowboys, you already have a lot of media attention on top of you as it is as a player. Not being in the media, with Micah already having a podcast, that was, I would say, pretty much doubled. And now getting further into the media world and having other responsibilities on top of your podcast and being this sort of leader in a sports media company, is that going to be seen as more of a distraction, especially this year? Not to mention with the Cowboys, there's always pressure on the Cowboys, but with the contract extension of Dak, where does CeeDee Lamb fall in that? His own contract extension as well. I'm sure multiple times throughout this offseason and into the season, people are going to ask him about that sort of dynamic that he is trying to balance with Bleacher Report and playing for the Dallas Cowboys. With this year, we're being so many unknown factors with the contracts, with the contract of Mike McCarthy, how this team looks a year or two from now. Pile that on top of Micah Parsons venturing off in the offseason, trying to overplan maybe for his future. That is something that I have questions about, but if he can manage it all well, like I mentioned before, from my knowledge, he doesn't have other responsibilities on top of this leadership position and football, so he could just be managing all fine. And it is weird a little bit now to see more players further themselves in the sports media world. Before, you had mainly, I'm thinking of Draymond Green appearing on shows, just as a co-host, just as a reference there to talk about the NBA or the NFL if you're an NFL player and get just your point of view from actually playing in today's game. It's now weird a little bit, unorthodox to see people further themselves in the media company, and it is just part of this development, this evolution of more and more players feeling that empowerment. You already sort of had it with the NBA and the way that they were going with how they controlled trades and looked for their best interest in, like I mentioned, trades and free agency and all of that. But also in the NFL, you didn't really have it too much. Now I think players are starting to embrace that empowerment more and more with kids also coming out of college having the NIL deals and them having that more responsibility on themselves to look out for themselves, not just on the football field, not just on their athletic careers, but also past that, looking forward to that, business ventures and things like that. It is just all part of the evolution, and now we're seeing it grow even more. And on that topic, just to look even further, kind of into the next wave of athletes who can sort of push this limit a bit more. The names that came to my mind right away, no real surprise, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter already has his podcast on Bleacher Report, already has a show with Bleacher Report, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him venturing further off as well, similar to Micah Parsons in this department. Once he gets into the NFL, once he has all these other opportunities available to him, Shedeur Sanders as well, the marketing you can get from him, who he is, who his dad is, I think that's a no-brainer that companies and other sponsors will try and get their hands on. And also, looking in the basketball world, also just coming to my mind right here is Tyrese Halliburton. I think he's one that's very engaged in the social media, just media in general world, and also Jalen Williams of the Oklahoma City Thunder are two more that I think would not only be entertaining to watch, but also I think just fit the mold of young players in the respected sport that they play, venturing more off in the sports media world. I can see them as likely candidates, but for right now, it's Micah Parsons pushing that envelope and growing the presence of these current athletes in the sports media world. I like it. I just want to see how it all plays out, and does it affect his playing career? Does it affect his performance on the field? That is left to be determined, but for right now, we'll move on with the show. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. I mentioned the reference back to 2021, that Chicago Bears quarterback room, including Andy Dalton, Justin Fields, and Nick Foles, described as toxic. I'll give you the reasons why that is and who is more to blame in that situation. Plus, are the New York Jets trying to replace Nathaniel Hackett? Is he on the hot seat in 2024? I'll give you guys my perspective on that. So stick around. Those two topics and more are coming up on today's episode. We'll be right back.